Hello guys, and welcome to this VOLKSWIZARD video. Now today we're going to have a look at a high performance Golf that hasn't really had the attention that it deserves, and that's the Mk6 Golf R. Now it came out in 2009 to replace the Mk5 Golf R32. Gone was that car's sonorous 3.2 litre V6. In its place was a much more muted 2 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine that had a lot in common with that in the Mk5 Golf GTI. But it wasn't all bad, because we got an extra 20 horsepower over the Mk5, and we got much more neutral handling thanks to the lighter engine in the car's nose, which meant it could finally hold a candle to the best in class. But it all came at a price, because this car basic, and it was pretty basic, was £31,000, and you could easily spec one to £40,000. And bear in mind, this was all before the PCP and leasing deals that have dominated the way people buy cars over recent years. So unsurprisingly, it didn't sell very well. Now, I thought I'd make this video to have a closer look at this car and see if it actually makes sense to any degree, what with the lovely Mk5 before it and the very popular and very capable Mk7 after it. So, without any further ado, let's have a look at the forgotten hot Golf, the Mk6 Golf R. Okay guys, I've managed to get not one but two Mk6 Golf Rs here today for your delectation, and you can actually buy these cars. They're here for sale at VOLKSWIZARD. Link in description to the website volkswizard.co.uk below, and there's a lot more information there. Now they might both look very similar being Tornado Red, but that's actually where the similarities end, because that one's manual, that one's DSG, that one's cloth, that one's leather, that one's got 18s, that one's got 19s, that one's a 3-door, and that one's a 5-door, and also that one's got dynamic chassis control, adaptable dampers, and that one's got just passive dampers. Also, that's done 130,000 miles, and that one's done about half of that, so quite different. So without any further ado, let's have a good look around them. One thing I really like about the Mk6 Golf R is that it's got a very aggressive front bumper. It's much more aggressive than that of the Mk7 R, and it's even probably better than that on that Mk5 R32, because that had that funny chrome bit in the middle. So this, to my eyes, is a very good looking car. It's also got xenon headlights, which if you order the 19s, for some reason they give you this area of the headlight in black. The standard headlight has got those in silver. A bit weird. This car externally is pretty standard. Hello Toby. It's got 18-inch wheels, which are in silver, and it's got Pirelli tyres, 225/40 18s. The brakes are quite big. I think they're 345s. They're not fancy two-piece ones like on the Mk4 R32. They're just like the Mk5 R32 ones, just big steel discs and relatively cheap to replace. You get a much more prominent sill cover on this one. Get vented rear discs. You get a bit bolder rear bumper with a diffuser in it, and in there you get the two tailpipes. Now they're just like the Mk5 R32 ones, and I think I'd probably rather have those over the ones on the Mk7 R with its 4 tailpipes. I think they look pretty cool. You get an R badge. Now this is slightly different to the Mk5 and 4 version. It's just like the Mk7 one. This car's got parking sensors, which were not standard. And because it's got 18s, it hasn't got the little extender bits here. Now these are a bit wider, I think. Yeah, that's a 235, so that extra bit of tyre means I've had to put these little bits on there. Let's have a look inside. So we've got a pair of sports seats. They're pretty well bolstered. They look in shape, much like the Mk5 ones. The Mk6 is basically a Mk5 with just a few trim changes, so that's why it might look very familiar. You get this very grippy fabric in the middle. You get this relatively grippy Alcantara on the outside. Now bearing in mind this car's done 130,000 miles. It has worn very well. You get RNS 510 navigation, which is a bit old now, but it actually works really well. It's touchscreen and I quite like it. There's R there on this, I think, metal trim on the dash. You get sill cover there with R on it. You get contrast stitching on the seats. It's like a silvery grey colour, which is also on the handbrake, gear gaiter, even on the floor mats. And you've got on this car, because it's got dynamic chassis control, just put the handbrake on, put it into neutral. You've got the comfort and sport button there for the adaptive chassis control or dynamic chassis control. Parking sensor button there, which isn't standard. Get a really nice steering wheel with this gloss black bit there and the R logo. Weirdly, The clocks don't say R on them, but if you turn them on, they've got blue. So I'm not sure where blue comes into the R signature, but maybe it's to do with the colour, rising blue or deep blue or lapis blue being the signature colour of the R range. You get stainless steel pedals, of which there are 3 on this car, being a manual. Mark 6 was the beginning of the infotainment integration, so you've got this media input area, USB there, and something for the museum in not too distant future, an old Apple connector there. Back seat space is pretty good, no different to a normal Mark 6 Golf. Boot floor's a little bit compromised because of the 4-wheel drive hardware underneath it, so yeah, it's still pretty good, but it just hasn't got the depth of a normal one. Get a space saver spare. So yeah, still a practical, typical Golf in many ways. We'll just have a quick look at this one. So it's got 19, as we said before. It's got leather, which they made a point of changing it to black. So on the Mark 5 it's called grey Vienna leather, this is black Vienna leather, and the overall perception is this is a much better quality interior, even though it's not actually as expensive to assemble in the factory. It does actually feel a lot nicer. So much though I actually want to get into it. So we've got paddles on the back of the steering wheel there for the DSG. Again, we've got nav, nice little integrated heated seat controls in the middle of the climate controls there. DSG gear knob. This car's not got ACC or DCC, so no button there. I don't know if you can see that. Parking sensors it has got though. Auto headlights, well, it's really boring and standard on these. Kind of don't get them on a lot of Audis, but you do on VWs. Self-dipping rear view mirror. Yeah, it's not a bad cabin. Let's have a quick look under the bonnet. So, as I mentioned in the intro, we've got a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. It's an EA113 if you're into your geeky Volkswagen codes. The new engine in the Mark 7 R, even in the Mark 6 GTI, that's an EA888. So we've got a cam belt here, and that's the engine code there, CDL. So that's the famous sort of Volkswagen popular motorsport engine. So they put it in the Scirocco R Cup cars in Germany. They had it in the Edition 35s in Poland when they raced those, and they modified them a bit, but they were really reliable, really strong engine, and they map really well. You get 300 easy on this car. Bear in mind it's 4-wheel drive as well, so you can actually use that power. So it's really, when you tune these cars, that this engine comes into its own, because you've got the traction and the reliability to just make the most of what is there with a simple remap. But which one should I drive? Should I go for DSG or should I go for manual? Well, actually it's not the gearbox that makes me want to choose this one, it's the fact it's got 18s and adaptive suspension, which makes it ride a lot better on the country roads we're going to drive on right now. So without any further ado, let's go and have a drive of the Mark 6 Volkswagen Golf R. Okay guys, here we are behind the wheel of the Mark 6 Volkswagen Golf R. Now if you've driven a Mark 5 Golf, this will feel strangely familiar. Obviously if you've driven a Mark 5 Golf R32, there will be one thing lacking, and that's the noise. If I put my foot down in third now, there's just the usual 4-cylinder drone. I think there's a bit of a fake sound generator in this car to give it a little bit more character. It's got a little bit more of a rort to it than the Mark 5 sort of GTI's Edition 30, which have got a very similar engine. But I can kind of give up that noise because this car shifts. And it's got a superb chassis, so it's much more neutral than the 5. So you can feel the back helping out because the front isn't really that overpowering. Doing this sort of slightly off camber corner, it's very precise. It feels a lot lighter on the nose than the Mark 5, and that is great. If you want to drive down the high street, make a lot of noise in 2 gears too low, you're probably better off with a Mark 5 R32. If you want a car to demolish a B road like that, this is the car. Now it's got adaptive dampers, this car, and on 18s it rides really well. The 19-inch car on normal dampers is a little bit too firm for a road like that, so I couldn't really recommend it, but we're running this in normal mode and it seems particularly well judged. The steering feel is good. There's not going to be an awful lot of slip with a car like this, because it just grips and goes. I mean, that was full throttle, and it just goes and goes and goes and goes. It is so much more fun to drive than a Mk5 R32. I think if you want the noise in a car to go around corners like this, you're going to have to buy an RS3, and that's, well, quite a lot more expensive. So it's money well spent if you buy the newer RS3. The old ones are really not much better handling than a Mk5 R32. Now, you might think this car will be good on fuel because it's a 4-cylinder engine. Well, the bad news is it's actually not much better than a Mk5 R32. But you do go a lot faster. One benefit though is that it does swerve the 500 quid plus road tax, so this is somewhere in the high 200s, or maybe about 300 now, which makes it a lot more palatable to owners, even me. And I love these cars, and I still wouldn't pay £500 to drive one. So loads and loads and loads of punch. The gear change isn't bad, it's not as good as a 7. I mean, this car's done 130, but it still feels tight. It just doesn't feel as effortless changing gear as it does in a manual Mk7. But make no mistake, this car is a very serious ground coverer. Now, how it fits into the R Hall of Fame is quite easy, really. It's a lot faster than the R32. It's not as theatrical, but it is a much sharper driver's tool. Is it as sharp as a 7? Well, the 7, in my opinion, is a little bit too clinical. It does the job, but it's a bit of a ruthless number chaser. It doesn't really do it with an awful lot of character. And I think that's quite important with something like an R. So I would rather have this over the 7. The 7's great, don't get me wrong, but I just think it lacks a certain something, and it's also a very common car. Now, I know that won't make it any less good performing than this car, but you've got to take into account that they're so common. And if you're an enthusiast of Volkswagens like I am, and you might be, sometimes you just want something a little bit different, and I think the fact this is quite rare and quite unusual makes up for the fact that it's slightly less dynamically good than a Mk7 Golf R. So anyway, that's my opinion. You may differ. I hope you've enjoyed this VOLKSWIZARD video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe. Please comment, that would be great. And I'll see you for the next one soon.